It's a hard story to hear, isn't it? You would think that a story of Jesus raising someone from the dead would be a purely joyful story, would be a welcome one. And there is joy here, yes, but it's still a hard story to hear. I'm struck by that, reading it this year. Part of why it's hard is because before we get to any of that joyful stuff, John moves through the tragedy of this story slowly, in vivid and sometimes excruciating detail. If he just told us that once upon a time Jesus raised someone from the dead, maybe that would have been a little simpler. But John lingers on the details, the mourners comforting family members, neighbors gathering around to offer counsel, tears, even the stench of death. All that detail is part of it. It's also hard because I think we want something else from Jesus here. We want him to come running as soon as he hears the news. This past week, a member of our community told me about a day long ago when she received a call saying that her daughter was in the hospital with an injury. She was washing dishes at the time, and she said she didn't even take off her apron. She left the sink full, put on her coat, and ran out the door. That's how we want Jesus to respond when he gets the news that Lazarus is sick. But that's not what he does. He tarries for 2 whole days. He shows up late, with Lazarus already long dead. If you had been here, my brother would not have died, say the sisters. It's hard because we want something else from Jesus, and it's hard because we also know that in some sense, this is the way it feels sometimes in life. We want Jesus to be a superhero who arrives in a split second whenever we need him. We want him to protect us in the most direct way possible. And of course, we know that it doesn't always work that way. Jesus is not a shield blocking us from all tears and harm. Sometimes healing doesn't come anywhere close to the schedule we wish for. It's a hard story for all of those reasons. And as if that weren't enough, I'm struck this year by yet another way it's hard too. It's hard because even in the promise of this story, even in the joyful part, something bold and strange is asked of us. Unbind him and let him go. Did you notice those words of Jesus stuck there at the end of this long story? They can seem like a throwaway line, like something that could just as easily have been left out. After Jesus has finally shown up and come to the tomb, after the stone has been rolled away and Lazarus has been summoned out and the once dead man is now stumbling into the light, Jesus says to the people all around him, unbind him and let him go. He didn't have to say this, you know. He could very well have done the unbinding himself. A certain kind of healer probably would have done that, would have taken care of everything, leaving the crowds to simply marvel at what he had done. But Jesus leaves a role for the people in the work of resurrection. They are to draw close to the tomb and walk up to this man who still has the smell of death lingering around him and start pulling off the strands of burial cloth. They are to set him free. The story's hard to hear because it asks something strange and bold from us. Jesus is in the business of bringing life from death, this story says, and we then are in the business of unbinding and setting free. Unbinding and setting free sounds good, of course. Who doesn't like the sound of that? But it is dangerous work. It always has been, and it always will be. 56 years ago, Ruby Bridges was assigned to be the first black child to attend William Frantz Elementary School in New Orleans. This was a white school in the segregated American South. White and black children had attended only separate schools in this part of the country until this time, when new laws were being enacted requiring schools to desegregate. And on the first day of school in 1960, Ruby entered her building with a pack of government security forces there to protect her. And she found the school entirely empty. All the white families had pulled their children out in protest. She learned by herself for the whole year, taught by the single teacher who didn't resign. And not only on that first day, but throughout the year, she faced a gauntlet of protesters on her way to school. There's video of all this that you can see still. White people shouting death threats and racial slurs at this lone child. One even thrust a child-sized casket in front of her. And the meaning was clear. Things are supposed to stay the way they are. Your dreams are supposed to stay dead. Unbinding and setting free is dangerous work. You are bound to come up against resistance. Ask the many in our congregation who have long been involved in loosing bonds of many kinds, who've long been struggling for an end to violence against women, or for dialogue among parties in conflict, or for a just sharing of natural resources. Deathly structures don't die without a fight. Ask Jesus about this, because it was the raising of Lazarus that finally got him killed in John's telling. This was the last straw. The religious leaders didn't like it, that he could draw great crowds with his teaching. And they didn't like it, that he could disturb the peace in the temple and the system going on there. They didn't like it, that he could give eyesight to a person born blind. But when they saw that he could bring life from death, that was it. The scales were now tipped. The very next verses in John make it clear. Then and there they agreed that Jesus must be stopped, and they began looking for a way to kill him. Certainly the religious leaders wanted to stop Jesus because they knew that this action, raising a dead man, would bring unprecedented attention. It would grow his movement and pose a challenge to their power and their standing. But even more, this action, bringing life from death, challenges the established order at such a basic level. If you can't trust the dead to stay dead, what can you trust? The ground was shifting beneath their feet. The powerful had everything to lose, and they were determined to stop Jesus as soon as possible. It's why we hear this reading right before we go into Holy Week. And this story is hard to hear because it says that we are part of that big picture. We are part of the work of resurrection. Jesus is bringing life from death, and he calls us to join in unbinding, in setting free. So we can see where life is stirring inside the old tombs, structures that keep poor people poor, or deny basic rights to whole groups, or create a different set of opportunities based on the color of a person's skin. We can challenge these old structures and help to change them by learning, by listening, by engaging with others from backgrounds very different from our own, by using our voice and our vote wisely. I'm convinced this has to be one of the great duties given to Christians in general, and to Christians in our time in particular. Where is new life stirring in our world, and what is holding it back? Where is God raising up new life from the tombs, and how are we to unbind it? How can we help set it free? This is hard work, and it does not go unchallenged. But the good news is we do not do it alone. Ruby continued attending school against all the odds all those years ago. And a child psychologist eventually began working with her to try to understand how she exhibited this incredible strength that she did. How at the age of 6, she was able to endure these taunts and threats. And in particular, he had noticed that her mouth was moving as she walked this gauntlet of protesters on the way to school. And he asked her about that. "Who were you talking to, Ruby?" "I was talking to God and praying for the people in the street," she said. "Why were you doing that, Ruby?" "Well, because I wanted to pray for them." "Don't you think they need praying for?" He agreed, and he kept on asking her more. "Where did you learn that?" "From my mommy and daddy, and from the minister at church. I pray every morning when I come to school and every afternoon when I go home." And the psychologist continued, "But Ruby, those people are so mean to you. You must have some other feelings besides wanting to pray for them." "No," she said. "I just keep praying for them and hope that God will be good to them. I always pray the same thing. Please, dear God, forgive them, because they do not know what they're doing. And I'm totally blown away by this, by the way this 6-year-old knew what it means to participate in Jesus' work of bringing life out of death. This is what it looks like, walking toward justice undeterred, with determination, with courage, and with love. Friends, God's promise is new life in us and in the world, and it is stirring already. There's lots of unbinding to be done. Amen.